Tom woke up the next morning with a heavy feeling in his chest. The drawing and ribbon from the previous day lay on the table in front of him. He had not slept well at all. Every sound in the night had kept him awake. The memory of the raised grave and the strange objects found inside the soil stayed in his thoughts like a shadow that refused to leave. He touched the drawing gently, tracing the lines that his daughter, Mira, had made long ago. The picture of the tall oak tree looked bright, even though the colors had faded with time. The small figure of Myra smiling under the tree made Tom feel warm and sad at the same time. The yellow ribbon beside the drawing made him think of the mornings when he used to tie it in her hair before she left for school. The memories brought tears to his eyes, but they also gave him strength. He stood up and prepared himself for another visit to the cemetery. The questions inside his heart were too strong to ignore. Why did the grave keep rising? How did Mira's things move into the soil? Who was responsible for these strange events when Tom reached the cemetery gate? The morning air felt fresh, but his thoughts were heavy. He hoped Ravi, the caretaker, might have seen something during the night. He walked quickly toward the tool shed where he found Ravi already at work. The older man greeted him with a serious face. Ravi said he had stayed longer than usual the previous evening, hoping to catch something unusual. But he had not seen anyone enter the cemetery. He said the night had been silent. No movement. No visitors. Nothing that could explain the changes in the grave. Tom felt disappointed, but he appreciated Ravi's effort. They walked together toward the grave. Tom's heart beat faster with each step. When they reached the oak tree, both men stopped at the same moment. The grave had changed again. The soil looked pushed upward a little more than before. It was not a big rise, but it was enough to see clearly. The shape was smooth, as if the ground itself had grown during the night. Tom felt a chill run through him. Ravi frowned deeply. He touched the soil again and shook his head. The grave had risen even though no one had visited the cemetery. Ravi insisted that he had kept a close watch the entire time he was there. He would have noticed anyone entering. They both stood in silence for some time. The early morning light made the raised soil appear almost like a small wave on the ground. The quiet around them felt heavier today. Tom finally asked Ravi if it was possible that the ground was shifting because of water under the earth, or because of old roots growing upward. Ravi considered the idea, but he said the soil was too soft and loose for it to be natural. Something was disturbing it from below. Tom felt his stomach tighten. He looked at the grave and thought about the drawing and ribbon. These were personal things that had been safely inside his home. They were not objects someone could find by accident. Someone or something had brought them to the grave. This thought troubled him deeply. Ravi suggested they try something new. He proposed staying overnight inside the cemetery. Not just for a few hours, but the entire night from sunset to sunrise. Tom hesitated at first. Spending a night in the cemetery felt frightening, especially with the strange events happening. But he also knew that he needed to understand what was going on. The mystery was growing and he could not ignore it. After thinking for a long moment, Tom agreed. They planned to return in the evening with lanterns, blankets, and anything they might need. Ravi promised he would stay awake the whole night to keep watch. Tom said he would stay with him. They both hoped that by staying there, they would finally see what was disturbing the grave. The day passed slowly. Tom returned home and tried to rest, but his mind was too full. He sat near the window, watching the sky change color through the day. The drawing and ribbon remained on the table as reminders of the mystery he needed to solve. He felt nervous about the upcoming night, but also determined. He had to protect Mira's resting place. As sunset approached, Tom left his house and walked toward the cemetery. The sky glowed with soft red and gold colors. The air felt cooler than usual. Tom carried a lantern, a small bag with water, and a thick blanket. When he reached the cemetery gate, he saw Ravi waiting for him with his own lantern and a small stool to sit on. They walked quietly to the oak tree. The cemetery looked different at dusk. The shadows of the stones stretched across the ground. The branches of the trees moved slightly in the wind, making soft rustling sounds. Tom felt a shiver run through him, but he stayed strong. Ravi placed his stool near the grave and sat down. Tom sat beside him on the ground with the blanket around his shoulders. The lantern light created a warm circle around them. The rest of the cemetery faded into darkness as the night grew deeper. For the first hour, they talked quietly. Ravi told stories about the old days when he first started working at the cemetery. He spoke about the peaceful families who visited their loved ones and the respect he always felt for the dead. Tom listened with calm interest. Talking helped him forget the fear for a while. As the night grew darker, the sounds of the world became softer. The wind slowed. The insects quieted. The moon rose slowly above the trees. Tom and Ravi fell silent. They watched the grave carefully, waiting for any sign of movement. Hours passed and the night felt endless. Tom's eyes felt heavy, but he forced himself to stay awake. Ravi sipped water from a small bottle and checked the time occasionally. The cemetery remained completely still. Just after midnight, a sudden sound made both men sit up straight. It was a soft rustling coming from behind the oak tree. Tom held his breath. Ravi pointed the lantern toward the sound. The bushes near the back of the grave shook slightly. Tom felt a cold fear rise inside him. He leaned forward, watching carefully. A moment later, a small shape appeared from behind the bushes. It was a stray dog walking slowly across the grass. The dog stopped when it saw the two men and then turned away. Tom let out a long breath of relief. Ravi smiled softly. They both knew it had not been the sound they were waiting for. But the moment had shown them how tense they were. The hours continued to pass. The night grew colder. Tom wrapped the blanket tighter around his shoulders. He thought about Mira. He wondered what she would think if she could see him sitting here watching her grave with such worry. The thought made him smile a little, but the sadness inside him remained. Just before dawn, when the sky was still dark but slowly turning lighter, Ravi suddenly touched Tom's arm. Tom looked up quickly. Ravi pointed at the grave. The soil was moving. At first it was a small shift, barely noticeable. But then the ground lifted slightly, as if something under the earth was pushing upward. Tom's heart jumped. He stared without blinking. Ravi held the lantern closer and the light showed the soil rising slowly in a smooth shape. Tom stood up and stepped back. Ravi stood too, holding the lantern high. The ground continued to shift for a moment and then became still again. There was no sound. No animal, no person. Only the earth moving on its own. Tom felt a deep fear in his chest. Ravi looked shocked. The movement had been clear and real. This was not imagination. This was something happening right in front of them, before they could speak. Tom noticed something small lying near the edge of the grave. It had not been there when the night began. He bent down and picked it up carefully. It was a tiny wooden toy bird. Mira had once carved it in school with the help of her teacher. She had painted it blue and red. She used to keep it on her small bedside table. Tom recognized the toy at once. He had not seen it since the week after her passing. He had searched for it many times but never found it. And now it was here, lying on the ground of the grave. The colors were faded but still visible. His hands trembled. His eyes filled with tears. Ravi stepped closer and asked where the toy had come from. Tom's voice shook as he explained. Ravi stared at the toy with disbelief. This was not something anyone could bring without entering Tom's home. And no one had entered his home. Tom held the toy close to his chest. He felt overwhelmed, frightened, confused, and emotional. The grave rose. Objects appeared. And now, the earth had moved right in front of their eyes. The first light of dawn spread across the cemetery. The sky brightened. Birds began to sing, but neither Tom nor Ravi felt comforted by the morning. They both stood silently, staring at the grave. Something was happening. Something that neither of them could explain. Tom knew one thing for certain. The mystery of Myra's grave was becoming deeper and more powerful. And he had to discover the truth, no matter how difficult it would be. The next morning arrived slowly, bringing a soft light across the cemetery. Tom felt exhausted, but wide awake at the same time. The toy bird he found during the night remained in his hand. He held it with a firm but gentle grip, as if he feared it might disappear if he let go. Ravi walked beside him, silent and thoughtful. They both knew the mystery had grown deeper after witnessing the soil move on its own. Tom stood before the grave again. The light of dawn revealed the same raised shape, calm and unmoving. It looked as if nothing unusual had happened during the night, but the memory of the shifting soil still filled Tom's mind. He could not forget how the ground had lifted, smooth and slow, as if something living had touched it from below. Ravi suggested they take a short rest before deciding their next step. But Tom did not want to leave the cemetery. His heart would not allow him to walk away while the grave held so many unanswered questions. Ravi understood and stayed with him, even though his eyes showed signs of tiredness. As the hours passed, more villagers entered the cemetery to visit their loved ones. Tom and Ravi stayed near the oak tree, watching the grave carefully. Neither man spoke much. Their thoughts were too heavy. Tom kept thinking about the objects that had appeared, the drawing, the ribbon, and now the toy bird. Each item had come from his home without any explanation. It felt as if Mira was sending messages, but he knew that could not be real. He wanted a logical answer, yet every passing hour made the mystery feel stronger and more emotional. Around midday, Ravi suggested checking the roots of the oak tree. He believed the large tree might be connected to the strange movements underground. Tom agreed. The tree had stood there for many years, and its roots must have spread deep into the soil. Maybe something under the tree was affecting the grave. They worked carefully, not wanting to damage the tree or disturb the resting place. Ravi used a small tool to clear some of the soil from the base of the trunk. Tom watched with anxious eyes. After a few minutes, Ravi paused. He touched a spot near the ground and called Tom to look. A narrow opening appeared beneath a large, twisting root. The opening was small at first, but Ravi widened it gently. A cool breath of air escaped the hole. Tom stepped closer. He felt a shiver on the back of his neck. Ravi pushed aside more soil, and the hole slowly formed into a small tunnel beneath the tree. The tunnel was not wide enough for a grown man to walk through easily, but it was clearly a passage of some kind. The air inside smelled damp but clean. Tom and Ravi exchanged worried glances. They wondered how a tunnel like this could form under the oak tree without anyone noticing. It was not natural. The shape of the tunnel looked carved or shaped intentionally. Ravi placed his lantern near the opening and shined the light inside. The narrow passage sloped slightly downward and disappeared into darkness. Tom felt fear rise inside him, but also a strong need to know what lay beyond the dark path. Ravi suggested they explore the tunnel. He believed the answers might be hidden inside. Tom hesitated. The idea of crawling into a dark underground passage made him uneasy, but he also felt that this might be the only way to understand what was disturbing Mira's grave. After a moment of thought, Tom agreed. Ravi handed him the lantern and said he would follow right behind. They removed loose soil to widen the opening enough for Tom to enter. Tom took a deep breath, held the lantern firmly, and slowly crawled into the tunnel. The inside of the tunnel felt cool and quiet. The soil walls were smooth, as if shaped by careful hands. Tom crawled slowly, keeping his lantern steady. Behind him, Ravi followed with steady movements. The tunnel became wider after a few meters, giving just enough room for Tom to crouch instead of crawl. The air grew slightly warmer. The sound of their breathing echoed faintly. They reached a point where the tunnel split into two narrow paths. Tom stopped. He lifted the lantern to look at both directions. The left path sloped deeper underground, while the right path curved gently toward the area beneath the grave. Tom chose the right path. They moved slowly, careful not to disturb the walls. The ground was smooth and firm, showing no signs of natural cracks or loose stones. After a few more steps, the tunnel opened into a wider chamber. The chamber was small, but clearly shaped with intention. The walls looked almost like hardened clay. The ceiling was supported by strong tree roots that created natural arches. Tom lifted the lantern higher. His breath caught in his throat. In the center of the chamber lay a small wooden box. The box was simple, unpolished, and old. It looked like something a child might use to keep small treasures. Tom walked toward it slowly, his heart beating loud in his chest. Ravi stayed close behind him. Tom knelt beside the box and touched it gently. It felt dry and warm. There was no lock, just a simple wooden lid. With trembling hands, Tom opened the lid. Inside the box lay several small items wrapped in soft cloth. Tom unfolded the cloth and saw objects he recognized at once. A tiny red bead that Mira used as a bracelet charm. A small paper star she had folded long ago. A little pebble she had carried in her pocket because she said it looked like a heart. Each item belonged to Mira. Each item had been missing from Tom's home for months. Tom stared at the objects, unable to speak. Tears gathered in his eyes. He felt as if someone had taken the memories of his daughter and hidden them underground in this secret place. He looked at Ravi, who was just as shocked. Ravi examined the chamber walls. He said the tunnel and chamber did not look like the work of animals. They looked shaped by careful hands, but the space was too small for an adult to enter comfortably. Whoever created it must have moved with ease inside tight spaces. Tom felt confused. He asked how these objects came here. Ravi had no answer. The situation made no sense. How could someone enter Tom's home, take these small treasures, travel into a hidden tunnel, and place them in this box? Without anyone knowing, Tom picked up the small paper star. He remembered the day Mira had folded it. She had smiled and said she wanted to make 100 stars one day. Holding it now made his heart ache deeply, but also brought a small comfort. It felt like Mira's presence was near. But before Tom could gather his thoughts, Ravi noticed something near the far wall. He pointed to a stack of dried grass arranged neatly in a corner. Under the grass lay a small cloth bag. Tom picked it up carefully and opened it. Inside the bag was a message written on a torn piece of paper. The handwriting was childish but careful. Tom's eyes widened when he recognized the handwriting. It was Mira's. The paper held only one line. "I am not alone."
Ow.
Tom felt the world freeze around him. His breath stopped for a moment. Ravi grabbed the lantern to look more closely at the writing. But Tom already knew. The letters curved exactly the way Mira used to write. The way she wrote her A&M was unmistakable. Tom's hands shook. He felt a cold wave pass through his body. The message was real. The handwriting was real. But Mira had been gone for a year. There was no way she could have written this recently. Ravi put a hand on Tom's shoulder. He asked if maybe she had written this message long ago. Tom shook his head. He had never seen this note before. Mira never wrote anything like this during her life. She had never owned a cloth bag like the one found in the chamber. Everything pointed to the note being placed here recently. Tom suddenly felt the walls of the chamber closing around him. His heart pounded fast. He needed answers, but the truth seemed farther than ever. He held the note tightly and stood up. Ravi suggested they leave the chamber for now. They needed to think clearly and decide their next steps above ground. Tom nodded slowly. He placed the note in his pocket and held the lantern as they crawled back through the tunnel. When they emerged into the sunlight, Tom took a deep breath of fresh air. The cemetery looked calm and peaceful, but the truth hidden under the earth was anything but peaceful. Tom felt a mixture of fear and hope. He did not know which feeling was stronger. He looked at the grave again. The soil remained raised, quiet, and still. But now he knew there was a secret world beneath it. A world that held Mira's things. A world that carried her handwriting. A world that whispered a message that turned his heart inside out. He stared at the grave. With trembling eyes, something was waiting for him beneath the earth. The next morning came with soft lights spreading across the village. Tom woke up early because he knew he had many things to understand and many decisions to make. His heart felt heavy but calm at the same time. After so many days of fear and confusion, he finally had clarity about what had been happening at the cemetery. Today he wanted to return there with a clear mind. It's not with fear but with understanding. Tom walked through the quiet path leading to the cemetery. Birds sang in the trees, and the wind moved the leaves in a gentle way. The world seemed peaceful again. When he reached Mira's grave, he felt a warm feeling around him. The soil looked settled and clean. It was no longer rising like before. It was calm, almost as if the grave itself knew that the truth had finally been uncovered. Tom placed his hand on the ground. It was firm and steady. For a moment he closed his eyes and let himself breathe. He imagined Myra smiling somewhere in a place of peace. He did not feel scared anymore. Instead, he felt grateful. The strange changes in the grave were not a sign of danger. They were the result of love, a love he had never expected to discover in such a moment. While standing there, he heard footsteps behind him. When he turned, he saw the man who had been visiting the grave secretly. His name was Rayon. He walked slowly, holding a small flower in his hand. He looked shy and careful, as if he did not want to cause any trouble. Tom gave a small nod, and Rayon stopped a few steps away from the grave. Rayon spoke gently. He said he had come to pay respect once more and wanted to make sure Tom was not upset with him. Tom shook his head. He told him there was no anger in his heart. He understood everything now. Myra had helped more people than he ever knew. Even after her passing, her kindness had lived through the memories and lives she touched. Rayon looked relieved. He placed the flower on the grave with great respect. Tom watched quietly. The way Rayon touched the soil showed care and gratitude. Tom asked him how long he had known Myra. Rayon explained that he had known her during a difficult time in his life. She had helped him when no one else did. She had shown kindness without asking for anything in return. When he heard about her passing, he felt the need to honor her in any way he could. Tom listened with full attention. Every story about Myra made him feel proud. As a father, he had always known she was a gentle soul, but hearing from others made his heart warm. Myra had carried light inside her. It made Tom feel like she was still shining in the world, even if only through memories and love. Rayon said he never wanted to worry. Tom, he explained how he added fresh soil and kept the grave clean. He thought he was protecting her memory in his own small way. Tom placed a hand on his shoulder and told him that love never causes harm. The strange changes in the grave had frightened him at first, but now he understood they came from a place of respect. Tom thanked him for being honest and for caring so much about Myra. They stood together for a moment, in silence. The cemetery felt peaceful. The sun rose higher in the sky, covering the place with soft golden light. Tom felt that this light was a sign of comfort, a sign that Myra was at peace, a sign that he could also move forward without fear. After some time, Rayon said goodbye and walked away quietly. Tom stayed near the grave a little longer. He wanted to talk to Myra, even if she could not answer. He told her he was proud of her for touching so many hearts. He told her he would keep her memory alive, not with sadness, but with strength. He promised he would live in a way that would make her smile. Later that day, Tom went home and sat near the window. He looked at the sky and thought about everything that had happened. His life had changed in a way he did not expect. Grief had turned into fear, then into confusion, and finally into understanding. He realized that sometimes life reveals lessons in unexpected ways. Myra's growing grave had brought him closer to the truth about his daughter's kindness. As days passed, Tom continued to visit the cemetery, but now his visits felt lighter. He cleaned the grave carefully, planted new flowers, and made the place look peaceful. He felt joy instead of worry. Often he saw Rayon from a distance, standing quietly near the grave. There was no tension between them anymore. They shared the same respect and love for someone who had changed their lives. 1. Afternoon, the caretaker of the cemetery approached Tom. He told him that he had heard about what happened and was glad everything was settled. He also shared a gentle idea. He suggested placing a small stone marker with a short message about Myra, something simple that reflected her nature. Tom liked the idea. He spent time thinking about the right words. He wanted something honest and warm. Finally, he decided on a message. It read, "Myra brought light with her kindness." Tom placed the stone near the grave. When he stepped back and looked at it, he felt tears forming in his eyes, but they were gentle tears, the kind that came from love rather than sadness. He felt Myra's presence in the soft air around him. He whispered a thank you before leaving. Time passed, and the story of the growing grave slowly became known in the village. People did not talk about it with fear. Instead, they spoke about Myra and how a small mystery led to a message of kindness. Children playing in the village heard the story too, and it became a peaceful tale that reminded everyone that love can grow even in places where people least expect it. Tom's life slowly returned to a steady rhythm. He began spending more time with friends and helping others when he could. He started visiting families who had lost loved ones, offering them comfort and support. He felt that this was a way of carrying Mira's kindness forward. Every time he comforted someone, he felt closer to his daughter. One evening, Tom sat under a tree near the cemetery. The sunset turned the sky into soft colors. The tree leaves made gentle shadows on the ground. Tom closed his eyes and breathed in the fresh air. He felt peace in his heart. For the first time since Mira left, he felt ready to move forward. He did not want to forget her, and he knew he never would. But he wanted to live with strength and hope. Just like she would have wanted, he opened his eyes and looked at the grave in the distance. It no longer appeared strange or frightening. It looked like a place of love. A place that held memories, not sorrow. A place where healing had begun. Tom stood up slowly and walked toward the grave one last time before going home. He placed his hand on the stone marker and smiled softly. He whispered that he would be all right. He whispered that he would carry her light. And in that moment, he felt a warm calm inside him, a calm that came from acceptance. As Tom walked home, he realized that the journey he had taken was not just about discovering the truth behind the growing grave. It was about rediscovering hope. It was about learning that even when life feels confusing, love can guide the way back to peace. It was about understanding that every heart leaves a mark in the world, and Mira's mark was filled with kindness. Tom reached his home and looked back one more time. The sky was turning darker as the stars began to appear. He felt that Mira was somewhere in that quiet sky, shining in her own gentle way. Tom smiled softly. The mystery that once frightened him had brought him healing. The grave no longer grew, but something else did. Hope grew. Peace grew. And Tom's love for his daughter grew with every passing day. The story of the growing grave ended, but the story of Mira's kindness lived on in every heart it touched. Tom walked through the quiet cemetery with a restless heart. The morning sun had risen, but the warm light did nothing to ease his worry. The grave of his daughter Mira had grown again. He could not understand the strange change, and he knew he needed help. The one person he trusted in the cemetery was Ravi, the caretaker, who had worked there for many years. Tom hoped that Ravi might have an answer, or at least a reasonable explanation that could calm his mind. He found Ravi near the small tool shed. The older man was arranging garden tools and cleaning a metal watering can. Ravi paused when he saw Tom approaching so early in the morning. Tom's face showed worry that could not be hidden. Ravi understood at once that something serious had happened. Ravi greeted him politely, but Tom did not waste time. He pointed toward the grave under the oak tree and asked why the ground looked raised again. Ravi frowned and followed Tom to the spot. When he reached the grave, he stopped in silence. His eyebrows tightened. His face showed confusion mixed with concern. Ravi bent down and examined the soil with slow, careful movements. He pressed his fingers into the loose dirt and then stood up again. He rubbed the soil between his fingers and looked at Tom with a serious expression. He confirmed that he had not touched the grave. He explained that he would never change anything at a grave unless the family requested it. He also said that the cemetery had been quiet during the nights, and he had not seen any unusual activity. Tom felt a heavy weight in his chest. If Ravi had not done it, then who had Ravi suggested that an animal might have passed through? But Tom shook his head. The changes did not look like the work of an animal. The soil was smooth and even. It looked as if someone had worked on it carefully and intentionally. Ravi walked around the grave and studied the ground from different angles. He looked for footprints or marks, but the only shapes he found were faint and unclear. He straightened up slowly and told Tom that the grave showed signs of being lifted from within the ground. His words made Tom's heart beat faster. The idea frightened Tom, but he tried to stay calm. He asked Ravi what could cause such a thing. Ravi hesitated. He explained that the cemetery was very old and that the soil sometimes shifted because of hidden roots and underground moisture. But even as he said it, he admitted that this particular change did not look natural. The shape of the raised soil was too smooth, too controlled, too consistent. Ravi then suggested something that made Tom uneasy. He said they should open the grave to check what was happening below the surface. It would not be a full opening, only a small inspection to understand why the soil kept rising. Tom felt conflicted. The thought of disturbing Myra's resting place made his heart ache, but the fear of something happening inside the grave was even stronger. After a long moment, he agreed. Ravi said they would do the inspection later in the afternoon, when the ground was warmer and easier to work with. He also needed permission from the local office, since opening any grave, even slightly, required official approval. Tom nodded and said he would wait. The hours passed slowly. Tom could not return home. Instead, he stayed near the cemetery gate, walking back and forth with deep worry. His thoughts kept circling around the same question. Why was the grave rising? What was pushing the soil upward? What could be hiding under the ground when afternoon arrived? Ravi returned with a small shovel, a wooden stick, and the approval paper. He asked Tom if he was ready. Tom was not sure if anyone could be ready for something like this, but he nodded anyway. They both walked toward the oak tree where Myra's grave stood like a quiet mystery. Ravi knelt and began to dig slowly on one side of the grave, far enough to avoid touching the coffin. Tom watched with tense shoulders. Every movement of the shovel made his heart beat harder. The soil was soft, and the digging went smoothly. After a short while, Ravi stopped and reached inside the small hole he had made. His hand brushed against something that did not feel like soil. Tom saw a flash of surprise on Ravi's face. Ravi carefully pulled out a small object covered in dirt. Tom stepped closer. When Ravi cleaned it with his hand, they saw that it was a thin wooden frame. Inside the frame was a piece of paper that looked old and slightly torn. Ravi handed the frame to Tom. Tom stared at it. The paper held a small drawing made with colored pencils. The lines were simple, drawn with a child's hand. The drawing showed a tall tree with long branches. Next to the tree stood a small figure of a girl holding a flower. Tom recognized the drawing immediately. Mira had made it when she was alive. She had given it to him on a warm afternoon, saying it was a picture of the oak tree and herself. Tom felt his breath catch as he held the drawing close to his chest. He could not understand how this picture had ended up buried in the soil above the grave. He had kept this drawing safely in a box inside his house. He knew he had never taken it outside, and now it appeared here in the ground as if someone had placed it there recently. Tom felt cold confusion mixed with deep emotion. Ravi did not know what to say. He suggested that someone who knew Tom and Mira might have placed it there as a way of showing kindness. But Tom shook his head. No one else had access to the box where the drawing was kept. It was impossible for anyone to remove it without him knowing. They continued searching the loosened soil. After a few minutes, Ravi found something else. It was a small yellow hair ribbon tied in a neat bow. Tom felt his heart shift again. This ribbon had belonged to Mira. She used to wear it on school days. After her passing, Tom had placed the ribbon inside a drawer in his room. It had never left the house. Tom began to tremble. He held the ribbon in his hand and felt a deep sadness combined with fear. How could objects from his home appear inside the soil of the grave? Who could have moved them without entering his locked house? Ravi tried to comfort him. But even he did not understand the strange situation. The sun began to lower in the sky as they finished the inspection. The soil had indeed been disturbed, but there was no sign of damage to the coffin. Nothing else was found. Ravi covered the small hole again and made sure the grave looked neat and respectful. Tom stood in silence. Holding the ribbon and the drawing, he felt powerless, lost, and confused. Ravi placed a hand on his shoulder and said he would stay nearby for a few nights to watch the cemetery. He wanted to see if someone was visiting the grave when no one was around. Tom appreciated the offer, but he still felt uneasy. Something did not feel right. As Tom walked home, he kept looking at the objects in his hands. They felt like messages from the past. They felt like signs of something unseen. The grave was not only rising, it was giving him back pieces of Myra's life. When he reached his home, he sat quietly on the wooden chair. He placed the drawing on the table and set the ribbon beside it. He felt a strange mix of hope and fear. Hope because these things reminded him of Mira. Fear because he had no explanation for how they appeared. Night arrived slowly. The sky turned dark, and the wind became cold. Tom sat awake, thinking about the next day. He wondered if the grave would rise again. He wondered if more objects would appear. He wondered what hidden story waited beneath the soil. He closed his eyes for a moment and whispered Mira's name. He hoped she was at peace. He hoped the truth, whatever it was, would not bring more pain. He hoped he would find the courage to face what was coming, and deep in his heart, he felt that the real mystery had only begun. Tom walked slowly along the narrow path of the village cemetery. The sun was low in the sky, and a soft orange light covered the rows of old stones and peaceful trees. He came here every week to visit his daughter, Mira. She had passed away 1 year earlier, and ever since that day, this place had become a silent part of his routine. The world outside kept moving, but his heart often stayed close to the little grave under the oak tree. Tom stopped near the familiar spot and felt his chest tighten. He always prepared himself before looking at the grave. It was his way of showing respect and love to the daughter he missed so deeply. But today, when he reached the grave, he froze in confusion. Something looked wrong. The ground was higher than before. He stared at it without blinking, trying to understand what had changed. The grave had always looked smooth and level. Tom remembered every small detail because he had spent many hours sitting beside it. Now the soil looked lifted and loose, almost like someone had added fresh dirt on top. He stepped closer and slowly knelt down. His hand touched the soil. It was soft and slightly damp, as if someone had dug there recently. A strange feeling ran through his mind. He pulled his hand back and stood up. Tom looked around the cemetery to see if anyone else was nearby. The air was calm. No one walked on the paths. The trees did not move. The only sound was the distant call of a bird. He did not understand how the grave could change like this. The caretaker, an older man named Ravi, never touched any grave without permission. Tom trusted him completely. So if Ravi had not done this, then who? Had Tom took a few steps back to see the grave from different angles? The light of the evening made the raised soil even more noticeable. The grave looked like a small mound that had grown overnight. His thoughts became heavy with worry. Was this caused by an animal digging under the ground? Was it the weather? Or was something else happening during the nights when he was not here? He closed his eyes for a moment and tried to calm his breathing. He did not want to jump to conclusions. He told himself that there must be a simple explanation. But he could not deny the uneasy feeling in his chest. This was not normal. He had visited the grave only 5 days ago, and it had looked completely fine then. Nothing seemed disturbed at that time. Tom stepped to the side of the grave, looked at the small white stone that carried Mira's name. He touched the top of the stone gently. It felt cold, but it gave him a sense of closeness to her. Mira had been a bright child who always smiled when she saw the sunrise. She loved finding small flowers under the old oak tree. Tom remembered how she used to hold his hand tightly as they walked home from school. That memory now felt like a distant dream, and seeing the grave change in such a strange way made the sadness heavier than usual. He walked around the grave slowly, looking carefully at every inch of the ground. If someone had touched the soil, they must have left marks. Yet the only marks he found were faint impressions, too unclear to understand. They did not look like footprints. They did not look like animal prints either. They were just small shapes that seemed pressed into the soil. Randomly, Tom crouched again and ran his fingers across the surface. He felt a cool breeze pass by, but the air carried no answers. The silence of the cemetery felt different. It felt like something was hidden just beneath the surface, waiting for him to notice it. He stood up again and looked at the grave one more time. It seemed even larger than before. The sight made him feel a strange mix of confusion and sadness. He whispered a quiet apology to Mira. Feeling guilty for being worried when he was supposed to be peaceful during his visit, he wanted to stay longer, but he needed to understand this mystery. He needed to talk to the caretaker. He needed to see if anyone else had noticed the strange change. He turned away from the grave and began walking toward the exit of the cemetery. The village road was empty as he walked home, but his thoughts kept returning to the grave. He replayed the sight of the raised soil again and again, hoping it would make sense. But each time the question returned to him with even more weight. Why was the grave growing? What was happening under the ground? Why would a peaceful resting place suddenly change like that? Tom reached his small house near the edge of the village. The house felt quiet without Mira's laughter. He sat on the wooden chair near the window and placed his hands on his knees. The image of the grave stayed in his mind. He could not remove it no matter how hard he tried. He wondered if he should return immediately to check again. But the sky was getting darker, and he knew the cemetery would soon close. He decided he would come early in the morning. If the grave changed again by then, it would mean something strange was truly happening. The thought made him uneasy, but he had no choice. He needed answers. Tom spent the night unable to rest. He turned from side to side, thinking about his daughter and her peaceful place in the ground. He did not want anything to disturb her rest. He hoped the morning light would bring clarity. He hoped the grave would look normal again, and that he could laugh at himself for worrying too much. But deep inside, he felt a different truth. Something unusual was happening, and he had to face it. Before sunrise, he left his house and walked quickly toward the cemetery. His steps were faster than usual. The cold morning air hit his face, but he did not slow down. When he reached the entrance, the sun had just begun to rise. He hurried to the grave, heart beating quickly. When he saw it, he stopped completely. The grave looked even higher than yesterday. The soil had risen again. The shape of the mound was smooth, as if it had grown naturally during the night. Tom stared at it with wide eyes. This was no mistake. This was no trick of light. Something was forcing the ground upward. His breath shook. This was more than he had expected. It felt like the ground was alive. He stepped closer and placed his hand on the soil again. It was soft, warm, and freshly disturbed. His heart filled with fear and confusion. He felt a lump rise in his throat. He whispered Mira's name softly, hoping somehow she could hear him. Hoping she knew he was trying to protect her. At that moment, Tom realized he could not face this mystery alone. He would have to talk to the caretaker. He would have to ask someone to help him understand what was happening. He stood up, wiped the soil from his hand, and took one last look at the grave. The truth was clear. The grave was changing on its own, and he had no idea why. He turned away and walked through the quiet cemetery, feeling the weight of a secret he had not asked for. He knew that whatever he discovered next could change everything he believed about his daughter's rest, and he was not ready for what he would find.